The next thing we want to look at is sidekicks, and there's a good reason for doing this. So it would be easier in many ways to move on to just looking at something like elbows, or maybe different kinds of Farley with pushing, something like that, something that just seems to link directly from the movement techniques and principles that we've already been looking at. It flows kind of naturally from punches. Elbows, for example, have a very similar movement to punches, but there's a technical, physiological concept that we need to understand, and this is based around something I've talked about before, the idea of a car suddenly braking and everything goes forward. Like the Yao Zhongzhong talks about, like you hit the lock point, and if you do it with power, it feels like all your muscles are going to fly forward off the bone. That kind of, if the car suddenly brakes, everything that's not pinned down in the car is going to fly forward. And that's a really, really important principle that affects our understanding of what we're doing in terms of relaxing the shoulders. But it's quite hard to get that concept at first from relaxing the shoulders. So it's a little bit easier to get this concept from the sidekick, because it's such a big muscle and the effects that we're trying to get is much more obvious. So that's the reason for looking at sidekick at this point. We can then feed that back into our understanding of how we use techniques with the upper body, and then that will help us progress a lot faster when we look at things like elbows and pushes and so on. Okay, so the first thing is there's still a massive amount of structural symmetry between kicks and the stuff that we've done already. It just pieces together like logical puzzles. The only thing that's slightly different is you need to warm up a little bit more with kicks. Obviously in an emergency you haven't got time to, it's the old karate joke, isn't it, where the karate expert gets mugged and he says, hold on a minute, I just need to take my shoes and socks off. So remember that I talked about the idea that actually, even at a beginner level, the human body is capable of generating a lot of force. And very often, the body that's a beginner body can't actually control those forces, those shearing forces, in a healthy way. So let's say you start ripping muscles and pulling muscles and damaging ligaments and pulling bones out and dislocating bones and things like that. It's really, really easy to do, because just through the laws of physics, we don't really understand the potential of our own bodies. Again, this links back to the thing that I was looking at a couple of videos ago, the idea that a lot of what we think about our body and the potential of our bodies isn't real, it's imaginary. And our bodies have far more potential than we understand in our Yiquan body that we're trying to develop. So it's very important to limber up a bit, to do a bit of stretching. I don't really want to go into stretching today. There's loads of videos on YouTube about how to warm up. Just your general, just stretching. We don't need to do too much just to start training quite light in terms of the sidekicks that we want to look at, but doing a little bit of limbering up, a little bit of warming up, this kind of stretch, limbering up a little bit. Said I wasn't going to go into it. Flexibility is something I want to look at separately because it's quite an interesting, but I'm going to assume that people have done a bit of limbering up, and we can then think about how we actually want to execute sidekicks and some of the rules and principles around it based on an Yiquan principle. Also, there's another thing to say, and that's that. So also there's all kinds of other things that we hear about that I should mention in terms of kicks, that people say, oh, this kind of kick isn't in Yiquan. Well, that's nonsense, because Yiquan is all techniques, many techniques. Wang Xingjia himself tells us that. And some tactical things like, you shouldn't kick high in a street fight. I understand that, but remember this idea that I kind of critiqued a bit, but said was actually true, that Yiquan's about more than fighting. So becoming a more well-rounded athlete, and if you can improve flexibility and doing high kicks and things like that, if you can, why not? It's all about becoming a healthy person who's got the most use out of their body, that you can do the most things. And then you can make decisions in the chaotic moment about what might be the right thing to do or not. Anyway, having said all of that, let's begin. And let's think about, first of all, that most of our stuff that we've already learned applies to kicks. So our structural symmetry, this idea that if you learn one thing, it teaches you 50 other things, and we can also extend that now and say that it interconnects with 1,000 other things, or maybe it interconnects with everything. Like one movement very often contains principles that are in everything within each one, which is quite an interesting idea. So the structural symmetry very strongly passes over into kicks. So most of what or a big chunk of what we need to know about kicks we already know, and that's really useful. Remember, I said that's one of the really useful things about each one. It's one of the really useful things that allows your intuition to react well in a crisis. So we begin with exactly the same stance. So we're going to look at lead leg side kick. The first thing to understand about this is that we want to lift our leg high. So this is a principle in Chinese wushu, and you see it all the time in sandar. The idea that no matter what kick you're throwing in, even if you're going for a low kick, that you lift the leg lifts up high. And you'll very often see these kind of drills, like particularly in sandar training, where people go around doing like that. This is particularly for side kick, and it's training to lift the leg up high before going into the side kick. But it's the same for front kick, and it's even the same if you want to kick like low into a round kick, that you lift the knee up. You lift the knee up high, and this is one of the things that you've really got to drill. And let's make no mistake about it, this does involve some improvement of musculature. That doesn't mean in terms of weightlifting or anything like that. The legs are already quite heavy. Remember, I've talked about this idea about being able to hold your leg out and things like that. And this not being necessarily about muscle strength, it's more about understanding and learning how to relax. Just as with every other aspect of our training, it's something that's very much fed by Zhang, and then moving into Mo Sabu movement, slow movement with the legs. Learning how to use muscles more efficiently and using visualization to improve muscle efficiency. So that's not what we want to talk about today, but we just need to be aware that at first people can find this quite hard and get a lot of cramps, and also it's partly involves flexibility and flexibility training, so don't look down on that either. So we want to lift our leg high like this. The reason for doing this is we want to lift our leg over other people's kicks. We want to lift up above all the chaos and then strike down from above. So lots of people are not really great kickers. Like, they might be really, really powerful kickers, but the technique of the kicks in a lot of martial arts comes from like a kind of low swinging move, like it'll swing up like that into the, and then there's a range of degrees to which people will lift their legs. What we want to do when someone's going to come in with a low kick like that, like a football kick, something like that, we want to be above it. We want to be above that kick. And very often you can just kick over other people's kicks like that. If you're fast enough, just kick over, and using it for check kicks as well. They throw a kick and just checking the kick, or just checking the leg, or putting the foot on the knee or something like that. Lifting up over what they're doing with their legs, lifting up over it and hitting it in from the top. This is going to be controversial. The two people who are like in each one, who represent the two, in my view, is science. You can critique the worst and the best. Are two very famous brothers. Yao Chengguang doesn't do this, and Yao Chengrong does do this. So what I'm going to say is, if you look at Yao Chengguang kick, he's very much like, he has to lean back like that quite a lot, and he lifts and does that like that, and he has to lean back to get the lift on his leg, and he doesn't pull his leg in, and he just kind of lifts it up like that and then kicks out like that. I mean, you can say that's right or wrong, but I'm going to say it's wrong, and I'm going to say, and even if you say it's right, well, if you go and look at Yao Chengrong, you can see that he does it exactly the way I'm talking about. He does it, in my view, exactly right, and he's a very good example of someone who's really worked on the concept of kicking within each one and linking it into these quintessence principles of Chinese wushu. That you see then, like most people in sandar do it like this as well. So lifting up first like that. So you raise the knee to lean back to lift there. If you look at Yao Chengguang do it, he leans back like that because he's lifting his leg very straight like that, and then kicking out like that. Still releasing force around there. We'll talk about that in a moment. We're still releasing force in the same way, but lifting the leg up quite straight first. That's really easy to stop if someone does that. You can just do that. That's very much like a taekwondo kind of way of doing it. You just, if you're very actively engaged with the moment and you spot it, you spot it, you can just check it like that, or you can even just beat it and kick right over it. Whereas if you look at Yao Cheng Rong do it, it's always lift up first, so you don't need to lean back at all. Then you can just release force this way, and you can use the lean back in the kick. That's how it's always done. Well, most people do that, but particularly in Chinese wushu, as we'll talk about in a moment, using the counterweight balance. Lean back like that, but you start like that and then open like that into the kick. But the tactical reason for doing it is we want to lift up over other people's kicks. We don't want our kicks to be easily checked. And also, it's not always clear which kick we're going to go from here, because everything changes into that. If it's a round kick, side kick, front kick, they're all the same, pretty much from the same posture. So in many ways, that's half the story. So we lift up. And at this point, this foot's not. You don't have to pull it fully in like that. You very often see it like that when people are demonstrating, because in their mind they're thinking side kick. So they curl the foot in like that. You can do that, but usually when people are sparring, it comes up, just comes straight up like that. It's not always clear which kick they're going to do, and that's the kind of camouflage posture that you want, so that because someone who's got really good fight IQ, they'll tell from this that you're going to do a side kick. They'll tell from the way the foot is angled. You know, if you're coming like this, you're probably going to do a front kick, and that's why we have this idea of the question mark kick, where you're going to do that and you're going to change into a round kick. But Chinese wushu already had this principle, this concept a very long time ago. So there's no need to go round like that with it, is what I'm saying, into the kick. In fact, we don't even want to do that, because if we go round like that, so that we're facing side on, yeah, we can open this way, which is what we want to do, but we've lost like a quarter of the centrifugal Farley that we want. Because remember, I talked about the centre line. This is exactly the same. We're going to release force around the centre line, just like we talked about 2-3 videos. We've talked about this, the idea that you've got this imaginary centre line. It's going to become a little bit more of a complex centre line now, as we'll talk about in a moment. But we want to release force, centrifugal Farley, round the centre line. So the more we can get on that, it's a small enough movement anyway, but the more we can get on that movement, the more we can get into that equation of mass times speed. In fact, these are like it's a wonderful concept, and I hate this thing where like people make it mean everything, or people make it mean one single thing. Mass times speed can be expressed in multiple different ways, and critically, multiple different levels of force production. So very small mass time speed like that, yeah, it can be useful. It can just move someone off balance or something like that if they've got hold of you and you just feel they're off balance. Yeah, there's no force really. I mean, there's force, but it's not going to spark someone out. It's just task specific. If their arm's there, I might be able to just move it out of the way like that. That's still Farley. But if I do like a massive side kick, stamping down into the knee, using the full range of centrifugal Farley, then I feed more into that equation and I create more force output. And again, this is one of the really dangerous things with these charlatans who do this who say that in each one there's this kind of spiritual force or something, that, you know, they just go like that and someone goes flying. For them, if that was true, then the amount of Farley in any movement, if you just go like that with your finger, someone's going to go flying back, because it's the same spiritual force. Doesn't matter if you do this or you do that, it's going to be the same force. And it's just nonsense, isn't it? It just doesn't make any sense. But it also detracts us from this amazing discovery of the way that we use structure and mass times speed to create this, you know, this amazing vision of the ancients, the ancient masters of wushu, who developed this martial art, this quintessence Chinese wushu. It detracts from their vision, what they discovered, and how complex and beautiful and wonderful, and also at the same time incredibly simple this thing is, and how real the effect is. So that's the other thing I meant to say, like I'm not going to do loads of stuff with power in these videos because I've not really warmed up myself, but there's loads and loads of videos of me kicking with power and kicking bags. I'm going to do loads more as well, and kick drills and showing how you release force with kicks, and it's really not the same as any other kind of martial art. There's some things that are very similar, but this is a unique Chinese method, and there's absolutely no question that it generates a significant amount of force. Now, remember from the first video that we said that in our basic Yiquan stance, the weight is predominantly on the back leg, 70% on the back leg, 30% on the front leg. And that's a really good example of how we can kind of fetishize a training guide principle that doesn't actually work out the same way in reality, because you can watch anyone who, anyone in Yiquan, no matter how famous, watch them doing bag work or moving, even when they start doing jam moves, something like that, but particularly when they start doing drills, or in those very rare occasions where we actually see people sparring, you'll see that they very often don't stand in that kind of narrow basic posture. They'll usually lengthen a little bit. Like I said at the beginning, this is like a unit. It's not a fixed posture, it's a unit. Very often we're like 1.5 units when we start moving like that. And it's just in the nature of having a physical body that when you start doing this, it just makes it a lot easier for the intent to balance the body out and make these calculations. The narrower the stance, the more complex the calculations need to be. If you're doing this and you're actually getting, you'd have to start, the more complex the calculations become to balance your body out. So it's just very natural that we just lengthen the stance either to 2 units or 1.5 units more usually. So if it was just the normal basic 30-70 1 unit stance, then it's very easy just to lift the leg up. We just have to just lean back a little bit as we lift, and it just helps us lift the leg. But when the stance becomes longer, the lean back is a lot more. It just becomes a lot harder. And if you lift, you'd actually go forward like that. Even with, let's say we've got 1 unit, even with just 1 unit, we've still got 30% forwards. So I'm going to try and do it without leaning back. You still fall forwards like that, so you still got to push back. If we've got 1.5 units and lift the foot, you'll start falling forward. So we've got to distribute the weight back in a moment. I mean, I'm explaining it, but of course these are the sort of things that you kind of intuitively learn through your training. The most important thing is to start, questioning the fetishization of things like what people say, like, your heels have got to be in line, or the feet have got to be exactly this far apart, your hands have got to be exactly this far, it's got to be 1, 2, 3 fists apart or something like that, and all these like very specific rules that people have. Then in reality, they don't really mean anything in most cases. So usually your posture is a little bit longer, and then you need to use the energy a little bit of pushing down into the floor to push yourself up. So very interestingly, this is another example of Fa-Li, but you just do it kind of naturally. Now, what I'm talking about here is something that develops as an advanced skill, so I'm just flagging it up now. It's just a little push off the floor that helps you, rather than leaning back, lifting and kicking, you use explosive force in the leg lift, just like if you're just going to jump up off the floor like that. Just sort of the first moment of explosive force isn't in the actual kick, it's in the way that you lift the leg. So again, these are exercises that are very commonly practiced in Sandar, for example, just like explosive lift. And that in itself has a really strong structural symmetry. For example, when we come to do knees, where we need that explosive movement off the floor like that. And then both of those things have a very strong, it's full structural symmetry when we start doing combinations where we kick and then land and then explode straight away. 1, 2, 3, explode right off the floor with an explosive movement off the floor into another kick. So those are more advanced concepts at the moment. I'm just flagging it up at the moment. And he's going to have to do a few complex things here. It is the case with sidekicks, but not so much. So let's say, for example, with a front kick, where, let's say lead leg front kick, you've got to do exactly the same thing, where you've got to lift explosively, and you've got to just adjust the weight back a little bit. But then when you kick in, you've got to lean forward a little bit as well, because otherwise you'll just push yourself back off the target. Everything's got to push into the hit point. So these things could become a lot more complex later on. But for now, that's too much, isn't it? It's too much information, too much conceptual download. Lift. So we've adjusted the weight back a little bit, like this, and then what we're going to do is we're going to turn on our axis like that. I'm going to turn this bottom foot out, and this is one of the key things that can revolutionise people's kicking. Not every great kicker does this, I have to say. So some kickers never turn the foot out, but they generate a massive amount of force. But the technique we want does do this, and usually, like, I see people all the time. I never interfere with other people's training, less than my students, but I never interfere with people's training. But I see people all the time, like, kicking the back, and they can't get any force. And I think, if you could just learn to open the body. Remember when we talked about open, close, up and down, this core principle of wushu. If they could just learn to open the body, they could double the power they were getting out of kicks like that. And that also tells us something very important that I've talked about before, about the power of concepts, about the power of thoughts, sports science, thinking about how things work, and contrasting that to these people who are like, oh no, you just got to do hard slog training for years on end and don't ask any questions, don't think, just do hard. Why are you even talking about it? These people are like, why are you even talking online? Just go training. I've just come from training. I've been training 4 hours. I've just come from training. Now I'm having a chat online, Very often it's people who themselves can't do anything, so they kind of get caught in this infinite loop of just doing hard training, thinking that hard training, volume of training is going to improve their level, and Yao Zhongzhun particularly denounces this idea. So we need to think about this, changing the way that you kick if you are a kicker. So we lift, and what we're going to do is we're going to open on the foot like that. See how the foot is, and this is the release of force round the axis, the generation of force. And remember when we talked about punches, and let's say the idea of a hook, you spin round the axis and you throw this thing out. This is why in old Yiquan they call it like circling meteor punch for this kind of thing. Because you can feel the centrifugal force just whips it out in a bit of a spiral like that. And it feels really logically connected into the posturing around movement. Well, now I'm going to have to do something different. The same but different. The posture, the idea is the same in terms of this centre line that we're visualising. The idea is the same, that we're going to release force, just like if I was going to release force into a hook. But this is a bit like the punch, that this is going to go around, but it's got to push something out straight with the jab. It's much more like that concept, only it's more extreme. This has got to go out quite far, so this circular movement around the axis has also got to be combined with pushing this straight thing out this way. So this bit's going round and that bit's going out straight, and we've got to time that perfectly. And this is one of the things that, as a coach, it's one of the things that I have to keep referring back to in students and saying, it's a problem with your timing when they can't quite get things right. So you've got people who are like doing that and then doing that, and people doing that and then doing that. And the timing between these movements is off. And it's so much easier to do it with a jab and get it with the jab than it is with a kick. So when people start doing kicks, very often the biggest problem that I'll see is the timing between the different elements, that they're timed differently and they're timed incorrectly. So getting this timing right is quite a complex ask. So from here, turn around and push out this way and getting it. And again, our key principle of Xing Yiquan, and I'm always saying the hand and the fist rather than the hand and the foot. But this time, the leg and the other leg to hit at the same time. And Again, think about the sophistication of this idea and how it's bastardized by people who don't really get it. That they always think like, well, it's got to be a step. The step and the hand have got to land at the same time, and that they can't go past one another. That I've talked about before. It doesn't have to be a step, like a full step like that. That's not what this Yourself Yiquan idea is getting at. It's talking about release force and the way that the foot works in release force, and which foot is it in harmony with. In this case, the leg. When it hits, the contact point, the hit point, is in harmony with the heel moving forward like that. Just like you know, when you play pinball and you've got those paddles, just like that. It's just that kind of movement, like that. Only we call this twist rooting. Sometimes call it bug crush rooting because you're crushing a bug under your foot like that. And they land at the same time like that. So that does two things. It makes sure that the force transmission from the fast movement round the axis transmits to the lock point, the hit point as it is when you hit the target, at exactly the right time to transmit as much force as possible. And it also locks the structure into a balanced posture, because when you hit, the force is going to rebound back, and you want it to be rooted in. So very often as you hit, you've got to calculate you don't want to push yourself back off the target. You want your force to go into the target. So it's got to be rooted forward from the leg, and that's quite a hard, because as we'll see in a moment, the body goes back, so it's quite a hard thing for the E to calculate the correct. You don't want to be leaning back too much like that with the leg. You want to be leaning in with the leg a little bit, even though the body is going back. So it's moving forward and moving back at the same time. That's quite a hard thing to describe. It's one of those things Wang Xiangjai says, like, you can only describe it so much in words. You've got to feel it. Where are we up to? We lift, and then we're going to just stamp down. Like, imagine stamping on someone's knee. As you stamp down, you open this way and put the leg out. So a couple of technical things then. You don't want to fully extend the leg. You don't want this to open out and the leg to snap against the patella like that. You don't want it to do that. We always maintain this springiness, this springy. When you see people doing it like that, particularly Yao Cheng Rong, like that, maintaining the springy chicken leg way of moving. So we don't, even when we fully release force and commit full power, there's always a little bend in the leg. It never fully goes out. There's lots of reasons for that. It's overdetermined in many ways. One is our overall concept of power conduction, from the generation of power from Farley to the contact point, that relies on this particular body consistency that we've talked about multiple times, your Yiquan body. Secondly, we don't want to damage the knee through continuous practice of snapping against the knee joint. Cultivation in Yiquan, really good cultivation, takes quite a long time. We want to be healthy, you know. Health is one of the pillars of Yiquan. We need our health over a long period of time. We don't want knee damage later on in life, so we don't want to do that. But also it makes much more sense functionally. So if you hit the target, let's say the target, it's shock absorption when we hit the target. And if the target is a lot harder than expected, then we've got this springy give in the kick like that. So it's not just locking into the knee. And particularly if you lock into the knee like that, then the only way the force can be absorbed is all the way back up the bone structure. And that's when we're going to really hurt the leg anyway. Imagine doing that on a brick wall, or somebody who's like a brick wall, and we're going to get knocked back. Our force is just going to rebound back. That tells us something about how force is transmitted and the laws of physics, that actually we can improve force transmission by locking out like that because the bones are solid. But in the reality of the context of the fight and the reality of the context of health and well-being, it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. So if it's locked, we're going to get pushed back and we're going to damage the knee. if it's got this springiness in it, we can still get pushed back, because there's a certain amount of tension. It's half tension, half relaxation, a dialectical interaction. If we release a lot of force and the target is solid enough, we can still get pushed back. It's one of the reasons why we've got to make this calculation about, we don't want this to go too far over like that. At the hit point, we want to be, if possible, just past. See, the leg is leaning in, like it's not leaning over that way like that. We don't want to be leaning over. If possible, we want to be just past like that, so that it can just create this arch, so that it's pushing down into the more it's this way, the more it's pushing down into the floor and compensating for the force that comes in when we contact. The more it's this way, the more the force will go into the floor like that, rather than back like that. But the wider we do it, the more we're gonna fall forward like that. So the best we can do is just like a tiny little bit, just if possible, either dead straight, but ideally just past. And that's one of the calculations that our intuitive body knowledge has got to make. You don't get that just from practicing on the air, I have to say. Like, you've got to do loads and loads of bag work and pad work just to get that feeling. And doing it particularly on, eventually doing it on like a heavier bag. It gives you so much positive feedback, and doing it with power. So you also can't get us just doing it dead light on a bag. That thing we see too often in each one. That testing structure won't give you enough. You've got to really put force in to feel the physical forces and teach your body how to adjust, give your the information it needs to make the correct adjustments for this kind of posture. So we're lifting, we're kicking out, and we're keeping the leg slightly bent, and we're just trying not to lean forwards, not to lean back. It's much easier. Like, if there's a target, you can just take a little bit more of a risk that it's going to stop your movement from, somewhere else. So you can just lean forward a little bit more if you're confident that you're going to kick the target, and that's the way to do it, I'm afraid. And if you miss, well, you just step down anyway. You just take a risk. Better than hitting the target and getting pushed back off balance like that. It's not a big deal anyway to kick and step down in most cases, so we can take that little bit of a risk with the lean into the micro lean into the kick. In terms of what part of the foot we want to kick with, like, each one's usually very shoe wearing focused, and I'm very shoe wearing focused, but we do have to think about sporting context as well if we want to promote each one across multiple different dimensions. It's not so much of a consideration for the side kick. Obviously we don't want to kick with the toes, and it's not like this kind of thing like where you kick with the edge of the foot as such, like the blade of the foot like that. It's pretty much this bit here usually, this bit, half the sole there, and kind of moving it. So let's say this whole edge round here. And we certainly don't want to turn the foot right over like that, so that it's on the edge. We want to keep the foot, if anything, a little bit turned up like that, and that's what makes us hit more with the sole of the foot rather than the edge, because we keep it turned up a little bit like that. Heel is fine, but to improve our chances of hitting the target in a crisis, if we think about here, we want to hit somewhere here, gives us this quite big, Ideally, we're not going to hit with that because it can twist the foot. Foot can go a little bit that way, but we don't want it to twist the foot, so it gives us quite a bit of a striking edge that we can hit the target with, that's going to be moving and difficult to kick in many cases. Think of like a shin or something like that. Someone throws a kick and we just side kick the shin. We'll talk about that in a moment. So that's our technical consideration. So we're going to lift, we're going to turn on the axis, but there you can see straight away that there's something different here. So if I throw a jab, you can see, remember I talked about this idea of the axis and the axis moving. So as I throw a jab, my axis is moving back like that. If this is my axis going through, it's just, I start off leaning just slightly forward, and then I move back, and the axis moves back as well. like that. And this is one of the things that my body's having to calculate. But I start off from exactly the same posture. I lift, see my axis is having to balance up again. Now my body's going to go back like that, but the axis is going to staying up like that. And this is a much more complex. So we move on from this idea that I talked about, that the axis goes through your, and now we start seeing that this really can't be anything to do with your backbone or anything like that. It's nothing to do with that. So 1, 2, and then my body's going to lean back, but the axis is going to stay straight and it's going to open like that. So as I lean back, the axis is going through my body like that now, down into from my leg up through my body. And that's the calculation that the E has got to make about how it releases force using this kind of centrifugal Farley. It's not the only kind of Farley, remember. And also remember that this is Farley. This is not just a kick, because we can do things like just without moving the foot at all like that. We can just check. When they throw a kick, this isn't using Farley at all. This is using an entirely different principle. This idea of blunt triangles and springy defensive force that Wang Shengzhai talks about. That you keep your body, talks about this idea of like blunt triangles. And here's 1, 2, 3, and we just 1, or 1, 2, 3. The whole body is constructed of different triangles, oblique and blunt triangles that knit together in different ways, and we create this springy, the idea that I've talked about and called an Yiquan body, this springy body. So that's just, they go for a front kick and they go for one of these bad front kicks where you just kind of lift up like that. And we spot it and we just go like that and just check the shin like that. And you can do loads and loads of drills by that. If you've got a training partner, get them to get the shin guards on and they just keep going like that, doing different kicks, and you just practice check. You're doing round kicks, side kick this way, if the kick's coming in this way, just check in like that, check. Using springy force, it doesn't have to use Farley at all. We can use, like, again, this idea of Farley, like, it's just mass times speed, so anything really, we could say in that sense is Farley. So even if we just do a little push like that, we could call that Farley. It's usually not what we idiomatically mean. We usually mean like very fast. It's implied in the very term Farley that we mean like an explosive movement. But in terms of the law of physics, as Yao Zhongzhong talks about, mass times speed. Well, this is mass times speed as well. If we just put a little push in or something like that, and very often if you see a weak point, you can push it. So it doesn't have to be Farley, but when we do this posture, we turn around there, we use this. Remember, it's the same as that we would use in a punch, but the body leans over with it. So we're going to make this posture where the body leans, and the higher the kick, the more we're going to lean the body back. And what we want is a dead straight line. Not breaking this rule of keeping the springy structure. We don't want to tense the body into a locked skeletal structure, but within that springy state, Yiquan body movement concept, our shoulder, hip, knee and heel are all going to be in line like that. That's going to counterbalance and add force into the posture. And one of the things that's happening here is we're using the lean back like this and the twist of the body. All of this is adding into the equation. We're using our mass to feed into the equation of mass times speed. So like that. Feeding into the at the same time, quite obviously, we're counterbalancing the weight of the leg so that we can make this posture even happen in the first place. So the E now is doing this very sophisticated calculation about, well, he wants to do this around the axis, but for one thing, you can't do it like that. The body's too contracted to do that like that, or you can't do it in an effective way. So he wants to open. This is a big example of our wushu principle of open. It wants to open into the posture, but it also wants this Farley around the axis. But now it's got to change it into an arc like that. It's going to go like that. So if we were doing If we were doing a hook, it'd be like that. But for the kick, we've got to lean back like that anyway. So it's over-determined. At the same time as this opens the quad so that we can actually do this posture and get force in this opening movement. It's exactly the same as if we go like that. It's opening, or it's a much bigger opening using the quad at exactly the same time. It's over-determined because we need to balance the weight of the leg. For a low kick like to the knee or something like that, we don't need to overdo it. Generally speaking, it's just like the body's kind of leaning back. The angle's like half what the leg angle is. So if the leg angle is there, and that's half our angle, that's how much the body usually needs to lean back just to counterbalance the weight of the leg. That does change, of course, on how efficiently you can use your muscles. Even if like, you know, you're perfectly able to do, you know, try to keep my weight going that way. You know, I could do that, no problem. What I can't do is release force around my axis like that by keeping that, because I've got to turn it anyway. To get this movement in, I've got to turn my foot. If I turn my foot, my whole axis is turning. That's how I'm going to get the far lee. Just kind of throw out the technique. I can't do that and that. I can't keep straight like that and do it. There's no movement in the hips to do it. My hips are moving like 2 centimeters, and I need legs are big, I need a big engine to, and that comes from turning the foot, opening the quad. As soon as I open the quad into the kick, my hips tip that way, my body's got to go with it. I can't tip my hips and keep my body that way. Body's got to go with it, and everything just over determines into this is the correct posture. Everything, the structural symmetry just interlinks step by step. It balances it, it allows the opening of the quad, it adds more momentum, adds more mass into the momentum of the movement, and that's the way to do it. Because you don't need every detail of the explanation, you just need to know what you're looking for in the movement, how to identify if it's correct. And just like everything else, there's a lock point. So from here, lift, this is the lock point, like that, and down, and down. Usually people won't necessarily hold the lock point, because for the exact reason that we've talked about, that actually if you're doing it right, this leg is leaning in a little bit. You can hardly see it, but it's just leaning in a little bit, but you can feel it when you do the lock point, that it's not quite balanced and you need to put your foot down. So actually that's a good sign. If you want to hold the lock point, you've got to usually lean back with your leg a little bit more, not with your body. Which is another important thing to think about, like, what are you leaning back with? Are you leaning back with your leg? Or are you leaning back with your body? Or both? So you can lean back with the leg and keep the body up like that. You can lean back with the body and keep the leg quite straight, and that's what we want. So it's worth just checking yourself in the mirror. We don't want to be leaning back. Don't want to be leaning back like that. That's what Yao Cheng Wang does, by the way, if you go and watch him do it. But watch Yao Cheng Wang, he doesn't do it like that. One, we don't want to lean back with the leg. If anything, we want to visualise and fall forward like that, because the leg is just, the weight distribution is just pushing it a little bit more towards that. As I say, that helps to anchor the technique into the ground, and it also just helps to add a little bit more physical body force, body weight into the kick. Once we've worked on all of that, then we can think more about this supporting leg that's just got to use this like this. It's crushing the bug routing like that. It's just got to turn out. Just think about a pinball paddle just doing that. Or if someone kicks a ball to you and you just go like that and release force like that. Ping. That'd be a cool goal. Each one goal. It's just like that. Goes from 45 degrees to 45 degrees back. And you can, if you need to do it higher and you need to really stretch into the kick, like in Sandai, you see it all the time. It's perfectly fine for the foot to go even further than 45 degrees back, maybe 50, 60. Usually not more than that, but I suppose if it goes any more, you'd be kicking back like this, a kind of Chang Chuan posture or something like that. But for the side kick, usually it doesn't need to go more than 45, 50, 55 degrees at the most. If it goes higher. And we put all the elements together. The next really important thing to think about is what do we do after the kick. So there's two important things here. One thing that we need to learn and one thing that we need to think about in terms of practice. We can do 1, 2. Like I say, it's absolutely fine just to kick and step down. One thing we very often see is like 1, and then back down like that, pulling the leg back in like that before going down. It's really not necessary to do that. Usually if you see someone doing that, I think this can also be a problem if they're explaining it in Chinese and you don't understand what they're explaining. Usually they're explaining the principle of it being springy, like that. They're going, keep your legs springy, like that. They're usually not saying 1, pull it in, and then put the leg down. The only reason for doing that you pull the leg in is if you're going to kick again, 1, or someone grabs it and you pull back, and you release force back like that. Usually you don't pull it up and put it down, because it's a waste of time while you stood on one leg. Why would you? 1, 2, pull it in like that. Unless maybe you're blocking a kick like that, or 1, 2, you change into another kick or something like that. That's the only time that you do that. If you're just going for the kick, 1, 2, you want to just drop straight down. 1, 2, use the hip and just drop straight down. Because there's loads of, you could tie yourself up thinking about, well, I'm going to put my foot down on their foot. The only thing to think about that is just to be aware that it happens. You do the kick and you drop, and your foot lands on their foot, and that can overbalance you. Anything can happen, so that's just the chaos, the reality of the fight. There's always those elements. Foot can buckle over. We want to go 1, 2, and the same for the big, say mid-level side kick. Just drop down into it. And even if you do something like a spinning back kick, just drop down after the posture. Don't worry about trying to pull it back. That's for showing off. Doing them on the air and kicking them and doing a full return back to the same stance. It's cool, but for reality, if you're going to do that like in a sporting competition, just kick and drop. Don't worry about it. Don't waste time with the drop down. This is something that is trained really, really seriously in traditional wushu, and contemporary wushu particularly, like with these basic exercises that people see, these kind of Shaolin exercises. Like that, where the leg lifts up and then it's got to come down very fast like that. You practice chopping the leg down like that with your leg raisers back onto the ball of the foot. It's exactly the same principle, the same quintessence principle of wushu that we're dealing with here. We're going to go and then down a little bit. Having said that, the second thing that we need to understand here is there's something a little bit more sophisticated going on. And this is the thing I talked about at the start that we need to understand. And this is the idea that the weight of the muscle itself, not just the weight, but the action of the muscle itself plays a role in how we move from the lock point into the next posture. And when you think about the big muscles in the leg and think about all those exercises we did, thinking about visualizing from Zhang relaxing the leg, that we relax the leg muscles and then we don't want to tense it when we bring it into the actual kick. Remember, I talked about this key idea that Yao Zongzong talks about, that relaxing these muscles around the shoulder so that they become almost like they're kind of wobbly, so that when you hit, this stays relaxed, and it's like the muscle wants to fly off the bone a little bit from the movement. That does quite a few useful things. One is a little bit like what do they call it? The flywheel on a governor on an old Victorian engine. You've got 2 big brass balls like that. You've got 2 big brass balls, mate, that go round the governor like that and help to balance it. Has a little bit of effect like that, and that adds a little bit into the Farley, because it aids the centrifugal force. But it does something else which is much more useful, much more important in terms of Yiquan, and that's that as the muscle Think of the muscle flying off the bone. As the muscle relaxes forward, if we bring the punch up just to the lock point, flies off the bone forwards like that, does nothing else. Just in the same way as if we do that, the muscles of the leg go like that, on the leg a little bit like that. Most people can't get this because they can't relax. They can't relax the leg muscles enough, and that's why we need one of the many really useful and important things that Zhuang does. Helps us to relax these muscles so we can get that feeling of the muscle. It's a little bit of an illusion. It happens like throughout all the muscles in the leg, and if we've got the right kind of relaxation, it happens throughout all the muscles in the arm. It's just the mass. It's just the mass of the muscles in one area on the shoulders and their position, and the same, the position on the extremities like this. And the same thing with the mass of the thigh muscles like that we just feel this effect a little bit more. And as we kick and the muscles go forward like that, and then they rebound back, so they're going to go like that. They're going to go like that. So you go back with the rebound. So you go back with the rebound into the kick. Right? So it just pulls back a tiny little bit with the. So in your mind you're thinking you're just going to put your foot down, but the quintessence movement principle that we want is that we go with the rebound. I think that should make sense, like the muscle goes boom, and then so it happens in a split second. It goes boom, and then it goes back like that. And we don't resist that. We don't resist that. We just drop down straight with it. Now I'm thinking about it, I'm overdoing it. I'm pulling it back like that, but that's where we need to go to next, because we can then utilise that muscle rebound. I mean, I'm just talking about the weight of the muscle, just going forward like this thing that Yourself talks about. The muscle's flying off the bone. Instead of going against it, we use it, we go with it. So one, and that can help us then pull the leg back in for another kick or something like that. You can see that it changes. If you do that, you can't do this twice. You can't do like a quarter routine and go twice. You go 1, 2. The second kick has got to rely on a slightly different principle of leaning in with the kick more. Your foot could go further back, but then you start twisting your posture and you go off balance. But it doesn't have to be a kick like that. It can be anything. It can change from the 1, 2 into there. But we use this. This is what determines the speed of our reaction and our really distinctive structural movement speed that we develop in the structural movement paradigm. This is like the timer, the thing that determines the time of how long it takes to go 1, 2, like that, because we go with the bounce of the muscle like that. And when you think about it, you can see that I'm doing that, or you can maybe heuristically feel from the timing that that's exactly what I'm doing. Boom, boom. It's the muscle going like that, and I just go with it. So 1, 2, change into the front kick, or change into the round kick or something like that. What determines that timing is that muscle bounce. We can get that faster. The more we release force around the axis, the more far lead power we generate, the faster that muscle rebound is, and then the faster that we can move into the change into the next posture. And this is like when we talk about internal forces and things that are going on in the body. This is like something going on in the body that, till it's explained, it'd never be clear that this is what's happening with the posture. That this is determining and feeding into our ability to use structural movement. It creates a very distinctive look about the movement, creates a very distinctive way of the way that the body uses speed and change from one posture to another, using this muscle rebound. I suppose it's something that maybe some people haven't heard about, but I can assure you it's absolutely classic Yao Zhongzhun theory. But Yao Zhongzhun explains it in terms of the shoulders, that the shoulders do this, and the importance of relaxing the shoulders. And remember, I said before, like people think that he's just talking about not hunching like that, and he makes it very clear that he's not, that he's talking about keeping the muscles relaxed and the way that this affects the body movement. And why that's so important is it adds this element of speed in terms of structural movement, in particular in terms of foreshortening the movement. So as I've mentioned in multiple videos, structural movement is big movements. It's big movements, and what we want to do on a more advanced level is shorten the time between each posture. So when we do a combination, 1, 2, 3, we don't want to get caught in this hit and stop, hit and stop, hit and stop. Instead, it's hit and stop. Feel the rebound of the muscle, and we use this idea that I've called the shimmy, and this is what it is. The muscle goes forward as the muscle comes back from flying off the bone. As it flies back the other way, that's when you go straight into that leads the movement into the next posture, and that's how we start foreshortening from big structural movements. So we start just using the shimmy. We can get the structural movement much shorter, and all I'm doing that is using this exactly the same effect, but I'm using it in my shoulders. You can see me doing it on the bag multiple times. You can still use fat lean, just get loads and loads of force into it. It's not always necessarily as forceful as doing a bigger movement, obviously, because it's just mass times speed. But then we bring in different tactical paradigms like drill 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 is the one with the most power. And that explains, for example, some things that you see. It's overdone in my view, but where you go, you see Yao Cheng Rong students doing 1, 2, 3, and they always put all the power on the last movement. It's like drilling and then drilling, foreshorten the movement with this muscle wobble type, and then boom, all the power goes into the last movement. And that we can learn that much more easily from doing it on the leg, as long as we can get the correct form of leg relaxation. So it's quite interesting when people say, well, punch is a punch, kick is a kick. Nah. But when Hansi Huang and Yao Zhongzhong say this kind of thing, this kind of structural movement understanding the quintessence principles of Wushu is world leading. Yeah, absolutely, there's no question. This is such a sophisticated movement paradigm. There's no question, and the power and the reality that it can generate. Doesn't mean the people that can do it are world-class fighters. You know, it's not like I'm going to enter the UFC and do anything but die within a minute if I last that long. But it's what other people could do with this knowledge. That's where each one goes in the future, you know. Spreading these ideas, and people who aren't going to die within 1 minute, what can they do with this kind of knowledge? That was Wang Shanji's vision, Yao Zhongzhong's vision, all the vision of all the students of Wang Shanji. That's my vision as well. So after that, we can think like, what are all the other footwork techniques that we've looked at, and we can say, well, actually, they're pretty much all the same. So usually remember that I said with the jab, we can do this kind of step behind like that, hidden step, and then we go like that, and that's quite an odd step to do. It's really useful actually, because it really confuses people about how far you are away, and you can kind of fake a little bit with the jab and pretend you can't reach, and then you're just in like that and you can close the distance. But usually it's the seeking step with the jab. When we want to step forward with a lead leg kick, usually it's the hidden step that we use, like, so we'll go 1, 2, like that. So I'm curling my foot in because I'm thinking about the side kick rather than the... Yeah, I wonder if I do that actually when I'm sparring. Something to video and look at anyway, and drill out. But use the hidden step, and as we step in, and remember we said this doesn't come past like that, it doesn't hit the heel, that's a disaster. It stops there like that, so you've got to, remember we talked about being able to truncate our movement, and that coming from Zhanzhuang. This is more just about practicing, it's just a knacky kind of thing, you don't have to do Zhanzhuang for this. But as we step in, we do like that. And this is a really good posture to just practicing. And one of the things it stops you doing is going too far back like that. Going a bit mad to see something like that. Not necessarily wrong, but we don't want it for this. 1, I'm just practicing. 2, like that. 2. And then we 1, 2, like that. Now this takes a little bit of time because we want to interlink the movements together into a smoother movement, and that doesn't happen straight away. For this reason that we want to go 1, 2, down, 1, 2, down. But when we actually do the kick, like that, we've got to eliminate that, obviously, that stop point there. So 1, 2. So look at the stages here that we go through. We go from step, lift, kick, and then our next stage is to make that lift much shorter, but we've not shorter in terms of length, but in terms of speed that we hold it for, but to keep the step. So you can see it's a little bit clumsy still. There's still a step, like 1, 2, even if we're getting the kick out faster. So I mean, we can do it like that. We can do it like that. I do it like that all the time. We just go 1, 2. It's a really solid, reliable step. But if we want to make up distance fast, we've got to change this into a skip like that. I'm doing my right way so you can see it better. Like a skip. Not like it, isn't it? 1, 2. And the time's got to be 1 into the lift like that. So instead of step, lift, it's skip and lift at the same time, like that. And then just timing the momentum into the kick. Into the kick like that. Into the kick. And that's much easier to do, by the way, when you do it mid. I find it much easier now to do it to the mid. It's partly because you really commit to it and you imagine that you're going to hit something, and that helps to take a bit more risk with the overall balance because it's a little bit more difficult to balance. You imagine you're going to hit something, so you just take that risk that that's going to stop you from falling over. There's absolutely tons and tons of videos of me doing it at full power. And next, I suppose, think about, I'll show some more things, but think about like what target you're going to hit. So this idea that Wang Chunjai talks about, hit the strongest part of your opponent, which I think it's so wonderfully contradictory. So to cut a long story short, something you'll see all the time in each one is this, like hit the hip here, or hit just right at the top of the thigh here, which is a really strong part of a person's stance. And just like, and do it from the back leg posture is exactly the same, lift up, and then from there it's exactly the same. It's just a little bit slower, that's all. The only thing is it just comes up, this comes up straight, and this just comes across a little bit like that to your centre line, and then just stamp down into the hip area. It just takes out particularly if you can get the back leg, it just takes out doesn't matter which one you do it to really, but it just takes the leg clean out like that. When people say like a high kick's too risky, that's still a risky high kick. Your foot can get caught or anything like that. But if you see the opening, and just go for it. And it's really good if they're in the opposite stance to you as well. If you're orthodox and they're southpaw, and you can just get under the guard and kick into the, or you're southpaw and they're orthodox, just get into under the guard and hit that strongest point and take it out. For self-defense, of course, knees. Just get a boom like that. Boom right in the knee. The top, you want to aim for the top of the knee. And one of the things you want to do is push the knee back, so it's not even about the kind of impact, or people say shock force in each one, stuff like that. Shock force! The new war toy to buy your kids, shock force. Whatever they mean by that. But if you can push your leg back, snap it. Like that. Doesn't even take that much force to do it. And if you notice someone's got like quite a wide, and the more their foot is, the more their leg is straight like that, the more effect that's going to have. But it could be inside as well, it could be either side, either angle, like that. 1, 2, and other important variations, like if people are really close like that, so you might lift and you might just stamp down like that, and you've got to use a curtailed movement like that. You can't fully open the So these are just little variations when you're more advanced at using your far leads. Lift and just stamp down onto the top of the knee from a very close range. And you can sidekick kicks as well, so someone's throwing a kick. If you see they're like quite a slow kick, you can just kick the leg, kick the shin, because that's the bit that's going to hurt the most. And if you can kick before they throw a kick and you can stop the kick at the above the knee. It's not a side kick, is it that? But we would do it this way, something like that. And if you stop the kick just before the knee, like they throw a round kick or something like that, and you kick and you just get your foot on it like that, so that they overextend their knee. That's a good target point. Other than that, all the footwork techniques are the same that we look for with the punches. So one, lift, kick, just stepping back, kicking, stepping in, kicking. We've done the big step in, 1, 2, with the triangle step. The only thing that changes is getting the momentum and the force to time perfectly with the contact point, and that's all about timing. So go back, look at all those footwork drills that I've given, and just start linking the kicks into this. All the same things apply, like moving to the side, kicking like that, moving this way, kicking, diagonally, different directions, all the same. Moving around, kick, all those footwork. I don't need to go through every single one. Do some drills another time that look at them, but use all those footwork. Practice all those basic footworks with the side kick. Keep doing your standing. Get that feeling in your leg, and be careful. Start out quite relaxed, but not so relaxed that you throw your leg out straight. That's the danger, because in trying to get this relaxed feeling in the muscle, you're going to start straightening your leg and damaging your knee. So may I just remind you that you don't get it like this, you get it like this. So get back to your standing, practice these quite relaxed. Don't try and rush it, step by step. I've got loads of videos where I'm doing kicks, side kicks, really full power, full structural movement, and changing into other things and combining. Go and have a look at those. I've got one where it's just one video where I'm saying something like kick like a piston hitting out or something like that. That's as perfect as I can do it as a demonstration. So go and have a look at that. And then when we come back to looking at techniques, this thing that we've learned about the way that we use the muscle rebound in Yiquan is going to revolutionize how we think about doing combinations. And that'll make it a lot easier as we learn things like elbows to think about how we use those in combinations. That will accelerate our learning. Remember our key idea. I'm going on with myself, I know. That's it. Again, thanks very much for watching. Really matters that people are interested. Thanks very much for that. And one love, I mean it. So nourish all things, compete with nothing. See you in the next one.